The biting wind howled through the desolate mountain pass, carrying with it a freezing chill that seemed to penetrate to the very bone. In the bleak expanse of the wilderness, the silence was broken only by the low, ominous growl of creatures lurking in the shadows. Colin huddled closer to his mother, his hands shivering inside his worn pockets. He looked up at her with eyes full of anxiety, hoping for a word of comfort. The temperature must have been 50 below zero, a freezing reality that made every breath feel like inhaling shards of glass. They had been stranded without food for 3 long days, and their strength was rapidly fading. The wolves were out there, moving invisibly through the thick snowstorm. Colin could almost feel their cold, calculating eyes watching them from the dark, just waiting for the perfect chance to strike. His mother looked down at him, her face tight with worry, but her eyes fierce with determination. She turned to their loyal canine companion, a large and intelligent German shepherd named Buck. She whispered that they only had one chance left, and they were going to have to fight their way out together. Suddenly, the harsh winter wilderness vanished, dissolving like a dream as the soft morning light filtered through the curtains of a warm bedroom. The voice of his mother, realistic and gentle, called out from the hallway. Colin shook his head, clearing the remnants of the vivid story he had been imagining. His mother, Mary, opened the door slightly, telling him it was time to go and reminding him that they had a busy schedule ahead. Colin quickly responded, promising to be right there. He knew exactly what needed to be done, stretching his arms and waking up completely. Downstairs, Buck was waiting patiently, his tail wagging a slow greeting. Colin grinned, playfully wrestling with the big dog on the floor. His mother smiled at the sight, but reminded him that they could not take the dog with them today. Colin pleaded, asking why they had to leave him behind, but Mary explained that his stepfather had made the final decision. Colin mumbled under his breath that the man was not his true father, but he knew he had to obey. He patted Buck on the head, telling him to be a good boy and stay safe until they returned. It was a difficult routine, but they had to endure it for the sake of peace in the household. Later that evening, the house was quiet. A simple note left on the kitchen counter read that Mary would be home late and asked someone to feed the dog. It just about summed up the cold atmosphere that had taken over the home since the marriage. A figure walked into the kitchen, grumbling about the stupid mutt as he opened a can of dog food. He dumped it into a dish and pushed it toward Buck, who looked up with intelligent, discerning eyes, refusing to touch the meal. The man sneered, asking if the animal was too proud to eat, before walking away into the dark backyard. A sudden rustling sound broke the stillness of the night. A sharp intake of breath, a sudden movement, and then an eerie silence enveloped the property. The next morning, a silver-haired investigator named Barnaby Jones arrived at the residence. He walked up the path with a calm, measured stride, his decades of experience reflecting in his observant eyes. He was greeted at the door by a woman who introduced herself not as the homeowner, but as a close acquaintance. Barnaby explained that he was looking for Mrs. Laura Beecher and mentioned that his secretary had called ahead to schedule an appointment. The woman, Claudia Elwood, invited him inside, explaining that Laura was out but would likely return shortly. As they walked into the spacious living room, Claudia revealed that she was a law partner of the late Mr. Joseph Beecher, and she had stopped by to collect some important documents he had been working on prior to his sudden passing. Barnaby nodded, acknowledging her identity. He explained that he was there representing California Meridian Insurance, as Mr. Beecher carried a couple of exceptionally large life insurance policies, one of which named Claudia's law firm as a beneficiary. He mentioned that he also had a meeting scheduled with her partner, Mr. Dan Carson, later that afternoon. Claudia realized then that Barnaby was an investigator sent to look into the tragedy. Because of the sheer size of the financial policies, the insurance company deemed a thorough inquiry necessary. Claudia offered to show Barnaby the exact location in the backyard where the incident took place. Barnaby accepted, thanking her for her time. As they stood near the garden path, Claudia mentioned that the official police report classified the dog attack as a purely accidental event. However, she could perceive that Barnaby suspected something deeper. She admitted that the dog had been expertly trained by Laura's first husband, and that Laura possessed a unique, absolute control over the animal. Claudia implied that Laura was a woman who always managed to get exactly what she wanted, pointing out that Joseph's death left her immensely wealthy, a stark contrast to what she would have received had their pending divorce gone through. Before the conversation could go any further, Laura Beecher stepped out into the yard, her face pale but her expression firm. She demanded to know what Claudia was telling the investigator. Claudia boldly repeated her assertion, stating it was merely the truth regarding the financial benefits of the tragedy. Angered, Laura ordered Claudia to leave her property immediately. Claudia complied with a cold smile, leaving behind a parting remark that good watchdogs never attack unless they are specifically ordered to do so. Left alone with Laura, Barnaby introduced himself politely. Another man, George Roswell, walked out from the house to join them. George introduced himself as an old friend of Laura's first husband, Ed, mentioning they had served in the Air Force together. Laura apologized for the tension, explaining that while she and Joseph had experienced marital difficulties, they were actively working through them, and there was no official talk of a divorce. Barnaby, with his characteristic wisdom, shared a gentle analogy, comparing a good marriage to picking huckleberries in the middle of summer, noting that the sweetest fruits are often surrounded by the sharpest thorns. George asked what specific information the insurance company required. Barnaby explained that the policy contained a double indemnity clause for accidental death, which depended heavily on a technicality regarding the exact nature of the dog's training. If Buck had been given formal attack training, the double indemnity clause would not apply. Laura insisted that her late husband had only trained Buck to protect the family, not to be a malicious creature. She added that Buck had absolutely no history of biting or aggression. When Barnaby asked to speak with young Colin, Laura informed him that the boy had been missing since breakfast, likely spending his time at the local animal shelter where Buck was currently being detained. At the animal shelter, the sound of barking dogs echoed through the concrete corridors. Barnaby found Colin sitting quietly outside a kennel, looking fiercely protective. Barnaby introduced himself gently, assuring the boy that he was not there to harm the dog. Colin was defensive, crying out that he would not let anyone destroy his companion. Barnaby knelt down, speaking in a calm, soothing tone, explaining that the final decision rested in legal hands, but he wanted to understand the truth. Colin insisted that Buck would never hurt anyone without a profound reason, suggesting that his stepfather must have mistreated the animal. Before they could speak further, an attendant called Colin to the telephone, stating his mother wished to speak with him. Barnaby encouraged the boy to answer the call, promising to watch over Buck. Once Colin was out of earshot, the shelter manager approached Barnaby with a heavy heart, revealing that an official order had just been handed down to destroy the dog at noon the following day. Hoping to evaluate the dog's true temperament, Barnaby requested a brief demonstration from the shelter handler. The handler led Buck out, demonstrating an array of advanced obedience commands. Buck moved with flawless precision, responding instantly to every whistle and verbal cue. The handler remarked that the boy and the dog had won the top obedience trophy for 3 consecutive years. Barnaby observed the dog's gentle demeanor and questioned whether it was scientifically possible to covertly retrain a standard obedience dog into a ruthless killer. The handler admitted that while it was highly unusual, an animal as intelligent as Buck could technically be taught almost anything by a skilled handler. Meanwhile, at the law firm, Laura Beecher was urgently speaking with Dan Carson. She pleaded with him to unseal her late husband's private files, convinced that Joseph had been drafting a new will. Dan cautioned her about the legal boundaries, but Laura remained single-minded, desperate to uncover the truth. Their conversation was interrupted when a secretary announced Barnaby's arrival. Dan welcomed the investigator into his private office, apologizing for the delay caused by court proceedings. Claudia Elwood was also present, her suspicion toward Laura still burning brightly. Claudia argued that if Laura admitted Joseph was planning to alter his will to cut her out completely, it would provide an absolute motive for murder. Dan tried to calm Claudia down, explaining to Barnaby that Joe had mentored her through law school, which explained why she took his death so personally. Dan provided Barnaby with a certified copy of the partnership agreements, noting that a corporate insurance payoff of $1 million certainly justified a rigorous investigation. Later that evening, Claudia secretly entered the Beecher residence using an old key, determined to find the elusive missing will. As she searched through the desk drawers in the study, the lights flashed on, revealing Laura standing in the doorway. Laura confronted her, accusing her of breaking in like a common criminal and threatening to call the authorities. Claudia remained defiant, claiming that the police would be highly interested in the hidden evidence of a motive. The two women exchanged bitter words, with Laura implying that Claudia was merely a disgruntled office employee whose romantic expectations had been entirely ignored by Joseph. Claudia fiercely reminded Laura that it was her specific dog that committed the act, and that no one else possessed the knowledge required to command the animal to strike. Barnaby continued his investigation by visiting the Wiley household, the neighbors who had provided Laura and Colin with an alibi for the night of the incident. Mrs. Mary Wiley welcomed him, confirming that Laura and Colin had arrived at her home around 6:15 and stayed past 10 o'clock. She emphasized that they had been close neighbors for over 7 years. Her young son, Jimmy, came inside and Barnaby asked him about Buck's past behavior. Jimmy insisted that Buck was completely gentle and had never bitten anyone. However, Jimmy inadvertently revealed a crucial detail. On the night of the tragedy, Colin had been incredibly angry about something, leaving the house abruptly before dinner was even served. Mrs. Wiley looked uneasy, admitting to Barnaby that Laura's marriage to Joseph had caused severe friction, as Colin completely rejected his new stepfather, leading to terrible arguments within the household. She added that Laura's first husband, Ed, had tragically drowned during a fishing trip years ago, an event that Colin and Buck miraculously survived. Returning to the office, Barnaby coordinated with his daughter-in-law and trusted associate, Betty Jones. Betty had been busy compiling background checks on all parties involved. She revealed that George Roswell was facing severe financial ruin, as a massive housing development project he had designed was on the verge of bankruptcy after Joseph Beecher flatly refused to finance it. Paradoxically, following Joseph's death, the project was officially announced to be moving forward, with Laura Beecher stepping in to fully underwrite the cost. Furthermore, Betty discovered that Claudia Elwood's father had been a prominent veterinarian in Idaho who specialized in operating a specialized kennel for breeding and training elite guard and attack dogs. This revelation meant that Claudia possessed the exact background and skills necessary to handle a dangerous animal. The situation grew critical when news arrived that Colin had broken into the animal shelter during the night, escaping into the rugged hills with Buck. The local police deployed a search helicopter equipped with a powerful spotlight to scan the terrain. Barnaby, knowing the boy's habits, utilized a clever strategy to locate him. He approached young Jimmy Wiley again, pretending that the shelter had accidentally administered a fatal dosage of medication to Buck, and that the dog would perish within hours without an immediate antidote. Terrified for his friend's pet, Jimmy immediately went to Colin's secret hiding spot in an abandoned shack in the hills, inadvertently leading Barnaby directly to them. Barnaby entered the shack quietly, finding Colin sheltering the shivering German shepherd. He calmed the frightened boy, speaking to him with the respect due to a young man facing a difficult world. Barnaby revealed that he had brought specialized forensic testing equipment to take ink prints of Buck's paws. After carefully comparing Buck's paw prints with the forensic photographs of the animal tracks found at the scene of Claudia Elwood's tragic death, which had occurred just hours prior, Barnaby discovered a definitive mismatch. The tracks left by the attacker in the garage did not match Buck's paws at all. This scientific evidence proved that an entirely different German Shepherd was being utilized as a weapon. Barnaby brought Colin and Buck safely back to the Beecher home, where a relieved Laura embraced her son. George Roswell was present, visibly uncomfortable with the sudden turn of events. Barnaby explained to the family and the arriving police interest that Joseph Beecher, who possessed a well-known phobia of dogs, would never have approached an unfamiliar animal in the dark unless he believed it was truly Buck. Someone had intentionally brought an identical, attack-trained German Shepherd to the home to execute the crime. Piecing together the final elements of the puzzle, Barnaby focused his attention on the law partner, Dan Carson. Through a meticulous review of corporate records, Betty discovered that Dan Carson's massive land development investment group was actually a sophisticated financial swindle. Joseph Beecher had uncovered the fraudulent scheme, gathered an ironclad collection of incriminating evidence, and was using it to confront his partner. To prevent his total ruin, Dan Carson, who had secretly acquired an attack-trained dog from an independent security kennel, utilized his knowledge of the family's routine to orchestrate the initial attack. When Claudia Elwood began searching the office files for the non-existent new will, Carson feared she would inadvertently uncover the hidden extortion documents, prompting him to silence her as well. In a dramatic final confrontation at a remote security dog training facility, Barnaby and the local authorities intercepted Dan Carson as he attempted to dispose of a second, identical German Shepherd. Faced with the overwhelming forensic evidence of the paw prints and the recovered financial documents that Joseph Beecher had securely hidden beneath a secret filing drawer, Carson realized his elaborate deception had completely unraveled. With the true perpetrator safely in custody, the cloud of suspicion was permanently lifted from the loyal family pet. Walking back to the car beneath the clear blue afternoon sky, Colin held tightly to Buck's collar, his face bright with happiness. Betty looked at her father-in-law with admiration, noting that he had steadfastly believed in the dog's innocence from the very beginning. Barnaby smiled warmly, patting the brave animal on the head, concluding that understanding the true nature of a loyal heart was always the simplest part of any complex case.